3 years ago, I bought the Lenovo Legion Y720. It was a great value laptop that was also well-rounded. Its 4-core i7 and GTX 1060 was a fantastic combo then, and still holds up for 1080p gaming today. Build quality was impressive for its class, as were its thermals and even its speakers. It was one of the most complete packages at the time, especially for the price. So today, I'm thrilled to check out their latest offering into the mid-range segment. Welcome everyone to the Lenovo Legion 5. Let's see if it can impress, shall we? So first impressions, and it's hard to believe that this thing is a gaming laptop. It's definitely a chonker with those thick protruding exhaust vents, but with a matte gray finish and some small chrome badging dotted around the place, this has to be the cleanest, most understated gaming laptop out there. The only actual hint that this is a gaming machine is the Legion logo at the back, which is positioned at a corner for a more discreet look. It also has this faint iridescent finish which gives it a bit of a wow factor. Overall, I love its design, and I think this will appeal to many people who want a powerful machine that they can take anywhere without feeling embarrassed. Now, it's not the most portable thing at 2.5 kilos, with its slim 170-watt power adapter taking an additional 550 grams, but you expect that from a gaming laptop. Despite being all plastic, the build quality is solid. The fit and finish is excellent, there's not much flex at the keyboard deck or the screen, but most surprisingly, all the materials feel nice to touch. The interior is made out of this soft touch rubbery coating, which is way more premium than the usual brushed plastic you see on many other similarly priced machines. It does a good job dealing with smudges, though depending on how messy you are, gunk can build up over time, but as long as you keep it clean, it should be fine. Disassembly was a little tricky though. Removing the 11 screws is easy, but you might need some prying tools and perhaps a friend to help pry the panel off, especially near the exhaust because of its shape. Once inside, we have access to 2 RAM slots and 2 M.2 slots, one of which is blocked by a 2.5-inch drive tray. The drive tray is present in models with the 60-watt-hour battery, however, models with the 80-watt-hour battery don't include it. Both models still come with 2 M.2 slots though, which is good. The port selection is also good, but the placement might take a little getting used to. Aside from the left and right, many of the ports are relegated to the back, which I actually like because it reduces clutter. The Legion 5 comes with 4 5GB USB-As, one of which is always on so you can charge devices from it when the laptop is off, 1 5GB USB-C with DisplayPort, 1 HDMI 2.0, 1 Ethernet, and an audio jack. No SD card reader or Thunderbolt 3 here, though curiously the Intel version of this laptop doesn't have Thunderbolt 3 either. And if you're wondering why I didn't include any USB 3.1 or 3.2 labeling, it's because USB naming is a train wreck right now, and it's easier to say 5GB than 3.1 Gen 1, so from now on I'm just gonna call them by their speeds because at the end of the day, that's what actually matters. You also get an integrated 720p webcam, which takes a page out of Lenovo's ThinkPad lineup because, like ThinkPads, it comes with a physical shutter to block the webcam. That is awesome, because it allows you to have a webcam which, let's face it, has become pretty relevant over the past year, while being able to control what it sees. This is how to ensure privacy. You don't need to remove the webcam entirely. Looking at you, Asus.
The webcam itself is fine. A little grainy, but about what you'd expect from a laptop. The mic is clear enough for video calls and provides enough detail in my voice.
The webcam is embedded into this reverse notch, which is handy because it makes opening the laptop easy. The design of the hinge also allows the screen to be opened up to 180 degrees, which not many gaming laptops can do. But now for the ultimate test. Can you open the laptop fully with just one hand? In all seriousness, I love it when the laptop can be opened single-handedly because it frees up your other hand. Even without the hard drive, which would shift the center of gravity slightly rearward, it's still possible, which is great. Moving on to the trackpad now, this one isn't my favorite. Although it's decently large, it tracks consistently and precisely, and gestures work well enough, I'm not a fan of the clicking mechanism. It's an integrated button, which means clicking will need more force as you get to the top, with the upper 2/3 being completely unclickable. Plus, the click itself generally needs more force than I like. Then there's the issue of the cursor moving slightly when you press down. Though if you prefer tapping, this won't be a problem, and really, trackpads on gaming laptops don't often get used, so I can forgive it for that. The keyboard though is something you'll definitely use, and this one is excellent. It has a nice weight and springiness, and although its 1.5mm key travel is a little bit shorter than what I'm used to, its actuation feels almost clicky, which makes the overall experience pretty satisfying. The keys also are slightly concave, which helps you feel where the centers of the keys are. The layout's good too. It's your average layout with a numpad, but I just love the large and well-spaced arrow keys. It helps make the keyboard area feel roomier, and they're super easy to use. As standard, you get a white backlit keyboard, but mine comes with the optional 4-zone RGB keyboard, which looks fantastic. The lighting is bright enough to see even in the day, and despite being 4-zone, color gradients are super smooth, unlike my old Y720, where you could clearly distinguish the different zones. You can swap between backlighting profiles using FN and spacebar, and you can customize them using the Lenovo Vantage software. You also have access to updates, battery settings, and performance profiles in the software. Oh, and speaking of performance profiles, this laptop has 3: quiet, balanced, and performance, and they can change the fan speeds as well as CPU power limits. You can swap between them using the FN and Q keyboard shortcut, and their respective colors are also shown on the status LED on the power button, which is a helpful indication. Vantage also allows you to activate hybrid mode, which automatically switches to integrated graphics when you're not gaming to save battery life. And when you use the quiet profile, games won't even use the dedicated graphics, instead using integrated graphics, which is a nice way to save even more battery. Now let's talk about the screen. My unit sports a matte 1080p 120Hz IPS display from AUO, and it's the weakest part of this laptop. First though, let's go over the strengths. 1080p is very sharp on this display at 141 ppi, and from the normal viewing distance of about 2 feet away, you won't be able to see individual pixels. Viewing angles are as expected from an IPS display, the contrast ratio is also as expected at about 1000:1, and backlight bleed was minimal. The 120Hz refresh rate is super fluid and smooth, which is great for gaming and even just general Windows usage. However, it doesn't have FreeSync or G-Sync, which means you might notice screen tearing in more demanding games, especially with less powerful configurations like the 1650 Ti in this unit, which isn't the most powerful for 1080p gaming. It doesn't get too bright either, topping out at just 250 nits, making it a little hard to use outdoors. The worst part though is the color gamut. With only 61% sRGB and 46% Adobe RGB, colors look pretty washed out on this panel. Here's a comparison showing the same background on my Y720 screen with 100% sRGB coverage and the Legion 5s with only 61, and the difference in color saturation is obvious. This is not a panel I'd recommend anyone use for serious content creation. But that's not all, because this panel has a sluggish 25 millisecond gray-to-gray response time, which means that moving images on this panel will produce noticeable ghosting, as you can see in this chase motion test comparison against a 5 millisecond panel. This shouldn't be a problem in Windows, but it won't be ideal for fast-paced games. I didn't really notice it though. Maybe it's because all of the fast-paced games that I tested on this laptop didn't have a high enough frame rate to reveal the effect. But even on the tough A15 with its 25 millisecond 144Hz panel and more powerful RTX 2060, I couldn't notice the ghosting. On the bright side though, this laptop comes with the option for a 300 nit 1080p 144Hz panel with 100% sRGB coverage, which I managed to find in a display unit in a store. Its colors and even its response time are much better than this 120Hz panel, so definitely an upgrade worth spending for. The speakers are also a strong point. They get quite loud, not the loudest I've heard, but still respectable, and I think the main reason for that is because instead of having them downward firing like many other laptops do, they're at an angle at the edges of the laptop. And because of that, the sound doesn't have to bounce off as many surfaces to get to your ears, resulting in a reasonably clean and detailed sound, though the bass could be better. If they included a subwoofer like they did on the old Y720 though, this baby would be really hard to beat. Now, I've decided to standardize the sound testing that I show here just to make comparisons easier, so from now on I'll use the same parts of a community episode at 100% volume for all future laptop testing. So here's what that sounds like on the Legion 5. Overall, I've enjoyed my experience with this laptop so far. Classy design, great build quality and materials, good keyboard and speakers, and extensive port selection. Even though the display isn't great, you can easily get the better panel by using Lenovo's configurator. And with that, it's time to talk specs. The unit I have is equipped with an 8-core 16-thread Ryzen 7 4800H with integrated Vega 7 graphics, a 50-watt GTX 1650 Ti, 8GB of DDR4 3200, a 512GB Samsung PM981A NVMe SSD, and an Intel AX200 Wi-Fi module that provides both dual-band AX Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5.0. And yes, we do have single-channel RAM, but I'm not actually upset about it, unlike with the A15. That's because the A15 I reviewed before was a high-end model, while the unit I have right now is one of the lower-end configurations, and it's common for low-spec models of laptops that have 8GB of RAM to have it in single-channel. Perhaps the manufacturers think that most people would upgrade to 16GB later on, and I get that, as it's the sweet spot for gaming right now. If you have 8GB in single channel in your laptop, then assuming you have a RAM slot to spare, upgrading to 16GB is easier and cheaper since you only have to buy one stick instead of two. However, if you go with 16GB of RAM straight away, which I recommend anyway since 8GB is kinda thin for a gaming laptop these days, you automatically get it in dual channel, which is good. In terms of configurations, this is the mid-range model, which retails for about $1,000 US. The range kicks off with a 6-core 12-thread Ryzen 5 4600H, a GTX 1650, 8GB of DDR4 3200, and a 128GB SSD for $800 US, while the top of the range model bumps that up to an 8-core 16-thread Ryzen 7 4800H, an RTX 2060, 16GB of DDR4 3200 in dual channel, and a 512GB SSD and a 1TB hard drive, and the 144Hz 1080p screen for $1,100 US. And being Lenovo, the Legion 5 is configurable. Unfortunately though, at the time of filming, you don't have the option to get anything higher than a 4600H or 1650 Ti, which is a bit of a shame. Anyway, now let's move on to how this laptop feels to use, and it's about as fast and responsive as it gets. Our SSD is one of the fastest 500GB Gen 3 SSDs out there at 3600 MB per second sequential read and 3000 MB per second sequential write. Our AX Wi-Fi module provides fast upload and download speeds, but our 120Hz screen is what makes this device feel even faster because of the smoothness of the graphics and animations, even with its slow response time. Battery life from the 60Wh battery was actually not bad for a gaming laptop. I got about 5 to 6 hours at 80% brightness with the keyboard lighting disabled and the quiet profile with the power mode at better battery. This means you're gonna have to bring a charger for all-day use. However, with the 80Wh battery, you should get about a 30% improvement in battery life to about 7 to 8 hours, which is great for a gaming laptop. Alright, now it's time to see what this laptop can really do, with some benchmarks. All these tests were run on performance mode with hybrid mode off for maximum cooling and performance. Let's start our first set of tests with PC Mark 10, a complete PC benchmarking software that tests your entire system in a variety of situations. PC Mark 10 results are divided into 3 subcategories, and we're comparing this system to the average 4800H and 1650 Ti laptop. Our system performs about as expected overall. It's slightly slower than average in essentials by 5% and digital content creation by 4%, but faster in productivity by about 8%, leading to an overall score that's right around average. The next test we have is 3D Mark Time Spy, a DirectX 12 benchmark that tests both the CPU and GPU. Our system is about 5% slower in the CPU score and within margin of error in graphics, which leads to an overall score that's about the same as average. In 3D Mark Firestrike, a DirectX 11 benchmark, the Legion 5 is basically the same in every category, leading to an overall score that's identical to the average. Overall, the Legion 5 is performing about as expected. Now that we know how this laptop performs for its spec, let's now see how the CPU performs compared to other models, starting with the single-threaded CPU benchmarks. In Cinebench R15 and R20, we see our 4800H roughly on par with every other Intel chip here, and much faster than the 3750H and 2700X, which both use the older Zen Plus architecture. Great performance, though no surprises here really, considering we've seen something similar from the A15. The hierarchy doesn't shuffle much in Geekbench 5 either, with the 4800H having Intel-level single-core performance and significantly faster than the 3750H and 2700X, though the 10980HK and 9900K offer a larger performance increase over the 4800H than in Cinebench. Moving on to the multi-threaded tests now, our 4800H is on par with the 9900K in R15 and... wait a minute. What? I know the 4800H is a beast, but I've never seen it perform this well. Anyway, like I was saying earlier, the 4800H is as fast as the 9900K desktop chip in R15 and just 6% slower in R20, while it's about 8% slower than the also desktop 3700X in R15 and 4% in R20. Because of that, it shreds every other 8-core laptop chip on this chart. It's even faster than the 4800H in the A15 that I reviewed before. That is astounding. In Geekbench 5, however, it's quite the opposite. It gets obliterated by its closest rivals in the previous test, the 9900K and 3700X, performing similarly instead to the 8-core 9880H. To add insult to injury, the 10750H has slightly higher scores, and that thing is down 2 cores. This is an awful result for a 4800H, however, it seems that Geekbench 5 is significantly affected by single-channel RAM, because when looking at single versus dual-channel benchmarks online, there is a huge performance delta between single and dual-channel systems. Cinebench, however, doesn't show any measurable effect going from single to dual-channel, or even a quad-channel for that matter, so the 4800H's score for that test is an accurate representation of its capabilities in this laptop. But why exactly does the 4800H in this machine perform so well? Well, to answer this, we have to see how it behaves under a sustained all-core load. Here you see that I'm capturing this from a camera. I'm sorry. I couldn't get the screen recording software to work here, so please just bear with me. Anyway, on the screen, I have Hardware Info 64 graphing CPU temperature, clock speed, and current TDP with a CPU-Z stress test running in the background. The CPU manages to stay at 4.1 GHz on all cores at 88 degrees, and that's it. We ran this for about an hour, even continuing off camera, and by that point, the TDP was increasing so slowly that we decided to end the test at around the 54 watt mark. So that's why our CPU performs like a desktop chip. It has a higher power limit than default. Despite that, it still remained at a very reasonable 88 degrees. Okay, that's enough of the CPU tests. Now let's see how our 1650 Ti performs. Here we see the 3D Mark TimeSpy graphics score of several GPUs, and our 1650 Ti is roughly equal in performance to the 1066GB in this test. It's 9.2% faster than the mobile 1650, which barely makes it worthy of the Ti mark, and kinda disappointing honestly, because it's not even a half step towards the next card up NVIDIA's product stack, the 1660 Ti, which is about 50% faster in this benchmark. If NVIDIA instead used the 1650 Super and branded it as a 1650 Ti for laptops, that would actually serve as a decent midpoint between the 1650 and 1660 Ti laptop cards. Moving on to the Firestrike graphics scores now, the trend doesn't change much, but the 1060 is noticeably faster in this test by 13.4%. The 1650 Ti maintains a 10.6% lead over the normal 1650, while the 1660 Ti is 45.6% faster. So let's see how this performance translates to games, starting with GTA 5. On the left, you can see the MSI Afterburner overlay with CPU temperature, usage, and clock speed, GPU temperature, usage, and clock speed, along with our current TDP and frame rate. I'm playing at very high settings at 1080p, and we're running well with an average of 59 FPS, a 1% low of 37, and a 0.1% low of 30.7. It's worth noting here that our 1650 Ti is being fully utilized in this game. If you've seen my A15 video, GTA 5 was the only title that was heavily affected by single-channel RAM, where its 2060 was only at about 60 to 70% usage. But the single-channel RAM doesn't seem to be affecting our frame rates here. indicating that our 1650 Ti isn't powerful enough to run into the single-channel bottleneck in this game. Next up, Modern Warfare. The game is running at high settings at 1080p, and we're averaging 70 FPS with a 1% low of 44.2 and a 0.1% low of 7.2. Aside from the 0.1% low, which is caused by stutters that happen during respawns, our performance is pretty good. The next game we have is Apex Legends. We're at maximum settings at 1080p, and we have good performance yet again with an average of 64, a 1% low of 41, and a 0.1% low of 32. Finally, we have Monster Hunter World. The game is running at high settings at 1080p, and we're not quite getting 60 FPS, but really for a third-person game that's not very fast-paced, it's perfectly fine. We're averaging 47 FPS with a 1% low of 41 and a 0.1% low of 38. Overall, good performance out of our 1650 Ti. Despite it being barely faster than a 1650, it's still a capable GPU, getting above 60 FPS at high settings in 1080p in most games that I've tested. Now let's see how the Legion 5 handles itself under the combined stress test. On the screen, I'm running a CPU-Z stress test along with the Heaven benchmark to stress our CPU and GPU simultaneously, with hardware info 64 graphing CPU temperature, clock speed, GPU temperature, clock speed, and current TDP. The CPU maintains about 4 GHz on all cores at 95 degrees as its TDP increases, while our GPU hovers at around 70 degrees. After the TDP limit is reached, and yes, there is a limit this time around, the 4800H stabilizes at 3.9 GHz at 93 degrees, which is pretty toasty, but actually not bad considering we have what's basically a mild overclock, while our 1650 Ti maintains 70 degrees, which is good. Exterior temperatures were good too, with the entire keyboard deck and palm rest staying warm at most. Fan noise was audible, but it wasn't too loud once it reached steady state. It's also worth noting that in gaming, it's significantly quieter even with the highest performance profile because only the GPU is being fully used. And with that, let's now go over how this laptop behaves in the different performance profiles. First up, we have the CPU-only stress test, and we're comparing the 4800H's TDP, sustained clock, and temperature across the three profiles, and the bars are scaled relative to performance mode. Keep in mind that all temperatures are over ambient, so 67 degrees in the performance profile would actually equal 88 degrees given the 21 degree room temperature. Performance mode offers a 54 plus watt TDP, which allows a sustained clock of 4.1 GHz, but the highest temperatures as a result. Balance mode uses the more conservative 45 watt limit, which reduces CPU clocks by about 200 MHz, but reduces temps by 10 degrees, which is big, but not very noticeable from the exterior. Quiet mode has the lowest limit of 25 watts, which drops temps even further to 39 degrees over ambient and clocks to about 3.1 GHz on all cores. Given that our CPU is the only thing being loaded, the fans were quiet and sounded almost identical across the three modes. Personally, I'd be okay with the higher temperatures under CPU-heavy workloads, as 88 degrees is still very far from the 4800H's maximum of 105, so I'd advise anyone running CPU-only workloads to stick with performance mode. Next up is the CPU and GPU stress test. This time, in addition to the CPU stuff, we're comparing GPU temperatures and clocks as well, and again, both CPU and GPU temps are over ambient. In a combined workload, the CPU performance scales similarly as last time, except with higher temperatures as both the CPU and GPU are being loaded. The more interesting thing here is GPU performance. GPU temperatures decrease as you go with the less powerful modes, however, its clocks remain the same, meaning GPU performance won't take a hit when going with balanced or quiet mode. Fan speeds with balanced and performance modes were similar, not terribly loud but still audible, while with quiet mode it was barely audible. So if you want to play games, you'll have roughly the same performance as the other profiles in quiet mode, while temperatures and noise are significantly reduced, which is great if you're playing in a quiet environment like a library. Though because of the lower CPU clock speeds, I'd expect the 1% and 0.1% lows to be slightly worse. Overall, great performance. The CPU is basically desktop class, and the GPU, not the most powerful, but still enough for many AAA games at 1080p high settings. The laptop runs reasonably cool and quiet, and it has some really interesting scaling with the different performance profiles. Finally, let's talk about value. And honestly, this mid-range model isn't looking too good. The TUF A15 I reviewed before gets you a significantly better GPU, more RAM, and a bigger battery for less money. in terms of outright price to performance, the A15 is technically a better pick, even if it feels cheaper and runs hotter. However, I wouldn't actually get this model. Instead, I would get the highest end Legion 5. You get a far better and more powerful laptop for just $50 more, and it beats the tough A15 and even the Omen 15 in terms of price to performance. It's pretty much the perfect configuration. But even then, whatever configuration you get, this is a great gaming laptop. There's actually nothing inherently wrong with it. It looks good but not flashy, it runs cool, it performs well, and it feels more expensive than it is. Thanks for watching, guys. If you liked this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel. Please also remember to hit that bell icon next to it so you don't miss any future videos. Links to buy the Legion 5 and its Intel sibling, the 5i, will be available in the description below. Post your questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, and suggestions down in the comments below, and I will see you in the next video.